Hey there, in this video we're going to be talking about loops in Python. Loops are really advantageous in the sense that they allow you to iterate over the same piece of code over and over again. Let's say that you have an array that you want to print out. You can either index every single element inside of that array, or you can just loop over that entire array in 2 or 3 lines of code. There are 2 kinds of loops inside of Python that are built in. The first is a for loop, and the second is a while loop. If you're coming from a different language such as Java or C or C++, you might know of a do-while loop. Python does not have any do-while loops, but we can certainly create our own do-while loop. Hi, I'm Brandon from Learning Code Online, and I want to help you achieve your programming goals. We offer courses and tutorials and even Python tutoring for those who may be interested in wanting to learn more about programming, specifically Python programming. If you can, just take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It'll mean a lot to me. Let's go ahead and start talking about loops. So we're going to go ahead and start off with the for loop. We will talk about the while loop and the do while here in a few minutes. So the syntax for a for loop here is the reserved word for, and then we're going to give a variable to this for loop, and then this in keyword, or reserved word I should say, inside of an iterator. Now, an iterator is just a list or a NumPy array or a tuple or a dictionary. And then anything that is underneath this for that is indented is what we're going to be repeating over and over again. So say that I have a list of 5 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Instead of doing my list at 0, print my list at 0. Instead of doing this, we see how many lines of code this has. Granted, it's not that many in this scenario, but what if we had a list of like 1,000? We're not going to want to do this. So instead, what we can use is a for loop. So we can have for number in my list, print number. So number is the element that is assigned to this variable inside of this for loop. So on the first iteration of this for loop, number is going to equal 1. On the second iteration, number is going to be equal to 2. So if I hit run over here, not only is our code much cleaner and much easier to read, but we get the exact same output. So now what if I wanted to increase this to like 1,000 numbers? We can use this range function, which takes 2 parameters, sometimes 1. The first one is going to be your start number, and then your second one is going to be your end number plus 1. So here, this is going to generate numbers between 0 and 999. So 1,000 numbers all in all. We hit run, and we see that we have 1,000 numbers that are printed. I don't know about you, but this is a lot cleaner than having to manually index this. So now let's talk a little bit about while loops. While loops are different because you don't know how many times you're going to be iterating over that specific list or array or tuple, whatever the heck it is. Instead, we're going to be looking at either a true or a false. So your syntax for a while loop is while either true or false, we're going to do the thing. So for instance, let's say that we have a number. We're just going to call this num equals 0. And what I want to do is I want to print numbers between 0 and 10. So we can do something like while num is less than or equal to 10, print num plus equals 1. We're going to go ahead and hit run, and we see that we print the numbers 0 through 10. Here's what's going on. So on the first iteration, num is 0. So it's going to evaluate this to be true, and then we're going to print it and then increment the number. Now number is 1. Reevaluate this, print, and keep going. Now on the very last iteration, num is 11. So this entire Boolean expression becomes false. And the moment that this expression hits false is the moment that that while loop stops executing, and it'll continue down to your code wherever this smiley face is. So do while loops are not built into Python, so we kind of have to build one ourselves. Different tutorials are going to tell you different ways of going about creating do while loops, and it's not necessarily explicit as to what the do while loop looks like because it looks different from example to example. So I'm going to give you one that I think is pretty simplistic and pretty simple to understand. So the whole purpose behind a do while loop is to be able to guarantee one iteration inside of our while loop before we break out of it or we exit out of it. So in this scenario, we have num set to 0, and then we have while true, and this will always run. And that is the key here. We're going to print the number and then increment it. And then we're going to do a check. If our number is greater than or equal to 0, we're going to break outside of this loop. And so if we hit run, we see that we have 0. We know that our number is 0 despite it saying if number is greater than or equal to 0. This right here guarantees that our loop runs at a minimum one time. So if I had num to be 10, for instance, we were to hit run, we would see that num is 10. Similarly, if num was -1, we would see -1 and 0. This break statement here means that we are going to exit out of the loop and stop executing it. It's very useful for scenarios like this. And similarly, the continue statement allows us to skip to the next iteration. So let's say that if I wanted to add in if num is less than or equal to less than 0, continue, meaning that any number that is negative, it's not going to print because of this continue statement. It'll go back up to the top of the loop and execute again. So I have num to be -1. So if we were to hit run, we see that this actually does not end execution. And the reason why is because we're stuck in an infinite loop. And it's because of these 3 lines of code right here. We're never incrementing -1. So we just keep going over and over and over and over, continuing inside of that while loop, right? So we'll go ahead and kill this real quick. And then inside of here, we'll do num plus equals 1. Now if we run it again, we see we have 0. So if we decrease this to -109, we see that we still only have 0. And that's a wrap for this video. Again, if you like it, please like and subscribe. We also have a free ebook out on ChatGPT prompting for code generation. If you're interested in it, I've left a link in the description below. I'll see you next video.